Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. I hope that you guys are safe. So today I thought that I would do a video to kind of mark the end of the year and share the books that I've read this year. I actually think this is the year that I've read the most books in my entire life, and a lot of them are faith related, some of them aren't. I don't have them all with me because I have lent some or I borrowed some off some people, but I'm still going to talk about every single book that I've read. So far we are currently on December the 3rd and I have read 20 books this year. So I've included the book that I'm currently reading because I will definitely finish that before the end of the year. But I wanted to, talk a little bit about each book, if I would recommend you to read them. And yeah, I thought it would be a good, fun video. So this is the first year that I've entirely finished my Bible, so that is the first book, not part of the 2021. And yes, this is the first year that I've finished the Bible cover to cover. I mean, I say it's the first year. I've been saved since March 2020, but yeah, I will have fully read the Bible cover to cover this year, which has been pretty cool. It's been amazing to go back through books that I've already read books that I've not read. And it's definitely something I'm going to do next year again, but with a new translation, so I will be reading a totally different translation next year. But yeah, it's been great. Would 10 out of 10 recommend. But today we're talking about not just the Bible. Okay, so the very first book that I read this year, I actually think I finished it, or I think I started it on New Year's Day and finished it on like the 3rd of January or something. And I actually don't have that one with me, so I will insert a picture of what it looks like here. And that is This Present Darkness by Frank E. Peretti. The reason why I don't have it is because I lent it to my auntie to read, and it is such a good book. It took me a little while to get into it, but I gave it 5 stars on Goodreads because it was such a good book. And it basically is, it's a fictional book and it goes into the lives of people in this small town, and it really touches on spiritual warfare. So I'm going to read the information on it. Ashton is just a typical small town, but when a skeptical reporter and a prayerful, hard-working pastor begin to investigate mysterious events, they suddenly find themselves caught up in a hideous New Age plot to enslave the townspeople and eventually the entire human race. The physical world meets the spiritual realm as the battle rages between forces of good and evil. This Present Darkness is a gripping story that brings keen insight into spiritual warfare and the necessity of prayer. And it is honestly such a good book. It's part of a series. I haven't read any of the other ones. Maybe next year I will read some of the other ones, but it was such a good read. The only thing, the reason why I found it so difficult to get into is because it changes perspectives throughout the book. But once you get into that and kind of know what's going on, it's very, very gripping and it's a really good read. So the next book that I read was Case for Christ. Now that I actually had another copy of this book, but I'm not entirely, I think I gave it to someone or I lent it to someone. So if you're watching this and you have my copy of Case for Christ and you finished reading it, can I please have it back? But I bought a new one because, to be honest, it's a book that I really will just keep lending out to people because it's a book that everybody needs to read. Maybe it's at home actually, it might be at my mum and dad's, but I would like my original, like the first copy, back because I've highlighted it, and I would be really intrigued when I do come to reread it what I'd highlighted and what I will re-highlight. But yes, this book basically is written by Lee Strobel, who was a journalist. I'm not sure if he still is, but it's basically, from his point of view, he tries to disprove Jesus and the existence of Jesus, and actually through all of his very in-depth research, he actually ends up proving Christ's existence and Christ's resurrection. So this is definitely a recommended read for anybody who's skeptical about whether Christ actually died and whether or not he actually rose again, and wants to find out more about what the science says. It's also a really good book for anybody who is new to faith. It's also a very good book for those who might want to answer, like know how to answer potential questions that people might throw out there about Christ's like existence. But yes, would 10 out of 10 recommend this. I watched the film and that's why I bought the book, because it came up in my suggested on Amazon Prime, and then I had to read the book because the book actually goes into so much more detail than the film does. So would 10 out of 10 recommend reading this book to anybody. So the next book that I read was Crash the Chatterbox by Stephen Furtick, and this basically focuses on, it says, 4 key areas in which negative thoughts are the most debilitating: insecurity, fear, condemnation and discouragement. It was quite a good like book to study alongside. I mean, it's so long since I read it, it doesn't stand out to me in my mind like Case for Christ does or This Present Darkness does, but I did enjoy it. And yeah, if you're struggling with like anxiety or anything, I would definitely recommend reading this. It was very good to kind of focus on that, and not that at the time I was really struggling with that, but I thought it was quite good to read. That's not a very good synopsis, but if this is something that you could be interested in, then yeah, I would definitely recommend. Okay, the next book is the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. A lot of people recommended me this book, and it's something that had been recommended to me for a very long time. It's a very quick read, like it's not a long book, but I'm gonna say some controversial opinions about this book because a lot of people do love it. It's really, really good because it goes into spiritual warfare and it opened up a lot of my eyes, just like This Present Darkness did. But what I'm gonna say is I found it really confusing to read. I don't know if it's because I was a new Christian or if it was the perception that I was going with it, because I hadn't even been a Christian a year. But because it's written from the perception of the devil, whenever he's referring to the enemy, he's talking about God, and I found that really confusing. I don't know if that's just me or if anybody else found that, but yeah, I found it really confusing because he speaks about good in the bad and bad in the good. So I did find it a little bit confusing to read, especially when it's talking about, for example, the enemy, because to me, I feel like my brain's conditioned that the enemy is the devil, but obviously it's written from the devil's perception, so like the enemy to him is God. But it was very good at bringing out the fact that actually we do live in a spiritual battle. And so yeah, it was very, very interesting read. I would recommend it, but take the time to read it, don't just rush it. Okay, the next book that I read was a suggestion from Mia, my friend Mia, and this is called The Language of God, and it basically looks into creation and the science behind it, and it's a bit like Case for Christ in the sense that the research was started from an atheist point of view, and actually the research basically ended up the author seeing that actually the God was real. And it's basically a scientist that presents evidence behind creation, and it's a very interesting read. I found it quite hard because it is very sciencey, like it goes into a lot of science in depth, and my mind just isn't very sciencey, but it was very interesting to read, but I did have to like take the time over it. So if you're a sciencey person and would like to maybe read up about creation and how the world was made and stuff, definitely would recommend this book because it's very in-depth and goes into a lot of detail. I do just want to say that if you know me and you want to borrow any of these books, then feel free to ask me. I'm happy to lend you some of these books if I have them. If I borrowed them off people, then obviously I can't lend you them, but yes, I would recommend the books that I'm recommending, and if you want to borrow them, then just ask. Okay, so the next book that I read was The Magician's Nephew by C.S. Lewis. I actually bought the set of the Chronicles of Narnia and I wanted to read them having read them as a child, but obviously I wasn't a Christian. I didn't understand the biblical links as a child. So I really wanted to read this from a Christian perspective. Absolutely loved it. I think I read it in a day. because it was so good. So if you haven't read the Chronicles of Narnia, or you have read them and you haven't read them as an adult, or you haven't read them as a Christian from a Christian perspective, or you have read them or haven't read them at all, read the Chronicles of Narnia, because they are so good, and there is a reason why they are so popular. So funnily enough, the next book I read was The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, the second book in the Chronicles of Narnia trilogy. A lot of people actually are debating the order of the books. Some people think that this was the first. Actually, the set that I have says that this was the first, and I would agree with that, because stuff tells you about what happens in this book, basically. Like, it makes sense to read them this way around. Absolutely loved this, loved it as a child, loved it again as an adult, loved it even more now that I understood the Christian like stuff that was littered through it. And actually I really loved how it brought different things from the Bible to life in a fiction-y way. And again, really easy to read, read it in a couple of days, so good. Okay, so the next one I actually listened to as an audiobook, and I listened to it as I ran, and that was called Sex, Purity and Longings of a Girl's Heart, Discovering the Beauty and Freedom of God-Defined Sexuality. 10 out of 10 would recommend. Yes, would definitely recommend. I can't remember it too much, but it was a definite good one to listen to while running. Okay, sorry if the camera's moved, my battery died, so hopefully this battery lasts. Okay, so the next book I also don't have with me, I lent to my mum, and it is called Redemption, From Iron Bars to Ironman, and it's John McAvoy's autobiography. This is not a Christian book, and although it has redemption in the title, it is not redemption in the form of Jesus Christ. It's a very inspiring read. The only criticism I have is that it has a lot of swearing, and I felt like it idolised being in prison a little bit. I find John McAvoy's story very inspiring, but basically, if you don't know who John McAvoy is, he is a former prisoner who basically went on to do all this incredible endurance sport. He has broken world records. He did like the longest row or something in prison, and actually, yeah, his story is very inspiring, but I did feel like the book kind of idolised why he was in prison and being in prison, and I felt like it almost kind of caused a little bit of glorification towards that. So that was my criticism. I only gave it 3 stars, but his story is very inspiring, don't get me wrong. He also very much worships sport. So from my perspective, I would not necessarily recommend it unless you want an inspiring sports story, which it definitely will do. The next book I also don't have, it's at my mum and dad's, and it is called The Perfect Puppy. I got a puppy this year, which if you have been following this channel, or if you follow me on Instagram, you will already know, but yes, I got a puppy this year, so I needed to learn how to have the perfect puppy. And so yeah, that book was great if you're looking for training tips about how to raise a puppy. The next book I also don't have. I lent it to a friend, and it is called The Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren. I actually did this. It's basically a 42 or a 40-day devotional, and I did this with my friend Megan, and it was an incredible book. She was the one who said, do you want to do this with me? And I was like, yeah, I'm all on board for a devotional. And it is such a good book. Sometimes I really hesitate, because sometimes I go to say, oh, I wish I had this when I was really struggling with depression, but actually I didn't have it for a reason, and that was God's timing, and I got it now. Like, I was asked to read it now for a reason, and actually, yeah, it was great, and it really opened my eyes, and actually God spoke to me a lot through it. There's some really good convicting stuff in there. There's some really good stuff in there that will help you grow, and yeah, it's just a great book. So if you're looking for like a devotional, then I would definitely recommend, and I would honestly recommend doing it with a friend. But yeah, like I said, I don't have this with me at the moment because I've lent it to a friend. But yes, would recommend 10 out of 10. The next book I don't have because I borrowed it from someone, and that is Woodlawn, the book. Now Woodlawn is my favourite movie. My friend Ben recommended me to watch it, and actually he's the one that lent me the book because he then went on to buy the book. Yes, the book is really good, and it really draws out a lot more than what the film has, but in general the film and the book are incredible. They're such inspiring stories, and if you want a story about revival, if you want a story about sport, if you want a story about racism in sport, if you want a story about, yeah, that's just so inspiring, then I would definitely recommend you to read this book, or watch the film, or both. Okay, the next one was amazing. I have lent it to a friend. There's a bit of a theme here. And this book is the Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. I was recommended to read this by 3 different people, and it is an incredible book. I actually want to do a separate video on it, and actually discuss a lot about what I learned in it and what I'm trying to implement in it, but it is such a good book. It was really convicting, it's really easy to read, it's written very conversationally, like you can almost feel like you're having a conversation with him, and actually it was so eye-opening to me about the importance of rest and the importance of reducing my hurry. And yes, I don't want to say too much in case I do that other video, but would 10 out of 10 recommend it. Again, once my friend Caitlin's finished with it, if you want to borrow it and you know me, then I will happily lend you it because it is such a good book. I keep raving on about it so much. The next book, I'm not sure what I've done with it. I don't know if I've lent it to someone or if it's hiding on my bookshelf, but this one was another recommendation from Mia, and it is The Black Swan Effect, and it's basically a book that goes into gender hierarchy, and it talks about women's role in church, and the idea of it is that you don't realise black swans are real until you've seen them, and actually it was a big eye-opener to me about women in leadership in the church, and actually it was very, very interesting. It's something I'd never really thought of because I had never thought women couldn't be pastors, but I was surprised that some people did have that attitude, and I wanted to find out more about that. It's something I really, really want to look into more about, and hopefully in the coming year I will get the opportunity to do that. But it was such a good read, and it's actually very nice that each chapter is written by a different person and it's not fully written by females, so it's actually really, really interesting to get different people's points of view. A bit of a theme here. This next book I do not have because I've lent it to a friend, and this is a biography about Billy Graham. If you know me, you know that I really, really respect Billy Graham, and actually I find him very inspiring. It's written by Greg Laurie, and it's called Billy Graham, the Man I Knew, and it was such a good insight, and actually I watched a documentary about Billy Graham and that's why I bought the book, because I wanted to know more. But yes, would 10 out of 10 recommend the read. If you want to know more about Billy Graham, if you want to read a biography that's really inspiring. The next one I do have, I haven't lent it to anyone yet, it's called Live No Lies by John Mark Comer. Having read Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, I wanted to read another book by John Mark Comer, and this one is actually quite recently released. This one is all about the lies that the devil tells you, and I'm going to actually read the blurb. The problem isn't just that we've been told lies, it's that we end up living them. Ancient apprentices of Jesus spoke of the 3 enemies of the soul, the devil, the flesh, and the world. In this provocative book, best-selling author John Mark Comer identifies the role lies play in our spiritual deformation and lays out a strategic plan to overcome them. I would 10 out of 10 recommend this book if you are going through any spiritual warfare, or are about to, because let's be real, you're either one of the two. And yes, so basically, if you live for Christ, read this book. Nothing more to say on that. Next book is another puppy one. Easy Puppy Squeezy, I think it's Easy Peasy Puppy Squeezy, and yeah, it was just a simple step-by-step guide onto raising a puppy. It was another puppy book that I read. Don't really need to explain more on that. The next book I just lent to a friend. I was actually recommended this by a friend and bought it, and then have lent it on to a different friend, and this was How to Talk About Jesus Without Being That Guy by Sam Chan. It's a very short book, it's very easy to read, but it's actually very practical, and would 10 out of 10 definitely recommend it to any Christians out there who want to share Jesus with their friends, just like Jesus calls us to do. The next one was lent to me by a friend. It's not really a book, but it's in a book. Like, it's 20-30 pages. It's like an essay. It's called The Greatest Thing in the World. It's very, very good. It's basically a letter written, not a letter, it's basically an essay. It basically just talks about Paul's message to the Corinthian church, and talks a lot about the love of Christ, and it's actually written by a guy who was from Stirling, which is why I was recommended it. Yes, very, very good book with 10 out of 10, well, essay / book with 10 out of 10 recommend. Although it's written, it's an old written, like it's old English, so it's very King Jamesy kind of vibe. It's very these, thys, thous. So if you find that difficult, still give it a go, because it's literally 30 pages, but would obviously just a pre-warning that, yeah, you might need to focus on that. So yes, we're coming up to the end now. This book was I was lent it by Mia. I've not given it her back yet because I've just finished it. It's basically called The Single Issue. It's something I haven't really spoken about yet on my channel, and I definitely will talk about it a little bit more. God called me to a year of singleness this year, and I've grown so much in my faith. I have grown so much in my relationship with Jesus from that, and yes, I think I've learned a lot in this season of singleness. That's not me saying that as soon as the 1st of January comes, I'm going to jump into a relationship with someone, because then arguably, how do you say that? Arguably, I have learned nothing. But actually this book was really, really good. Mia lent me it, and it's basically, yes, it's all about singleness in general, and the perception of singleness within the church, which, to be honest, has been very interesting to read. I have only been in the church like, what, nearly 2 years, and actually, yes, I can understand the thoughts in this book. And yeah, I don't want to talk too much on it again, because I do kind of want to do a separate video on singleness. This book was great if you have been called to a year of singleness. If you are single, then I would definitely recommend reading this book, because it is very, very good. Yes, I don't want to say too much more on it, because I do want to do a separate video on singleness and, yeah, what I've learned. But if you have any questions, feel free to drop me a message. So the book that I'm currently reading that I, yes, will definitely finish before Christmas, and I might even start another book after this before Christmas, or before the new year, because I would like to do a lot of reading over Christmas. If I do read more before the end of the year, then I will put them in a comment and tag them, the books that I do read. But the book that I'm currently reading, my auntie lent me it, and it is not a faith book. It's a sporty one. It is Louise Minchin's Dare to Try. It's basically all about her journey from BBC breakfast sofa to GB triathlete. I am literally in chapter 2, but it is so good. Very well written, actually, and it's quite nice to read. Yeah, it's quite nice to read something that I actually kind of relate to. Some of the stuff in it, I can understand the thoughts of someone who is trying triathlon for the first time. So actually, I'm very looking forward to reading this. I think it'll be an interesting read. And yeah, I'm happy to review it more in the comments below once I've read it. If you want to know what I'm reading, or if you're actually interested in what I'm reading, then feel free to follow me on Goodreads. I'll leave the link below. But I do use Goodreads, and yes, I tend to rate the books I read. I don't always review the books I read, but I tend to always rate them. So at least you'll see if I've given it like 2 stars or if I've given it 5 stars. But yeah, if you're actually interested in what I'm reading, then feel free to check that out. But yeah, that's been the 21 books so far that I've read. That's not all of them this year. Well, I've not actually fully finished this, but yeah. But yeah, most of them were faith related. And yeah, I hope that you have had either a recommendation or yeah, if you have any book recommendations, feel free to drop them below. I do have some on my bookshelf that I will be reading very, very soon, but yes, I'm always open to recommendations because actually I've really enjoyed getting back into reading this year. And so yes, I hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you have, give it a thumbs up, click the subscribe, I can't speak English. Click the subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye guys.